right. We are going to get started here. Good to see you all this morning. Sorry, that was my phone. Not you guys. Sorry. Yeah, I know. I realized I said, oh, no, I didn't mean that. No, let's not do that. All right, so we are in Genesis 29. And I think we stopped right before the baby battle royale. Yep. Yeah, with chapter 30.
Pastor Joe?
Yeah.
Any more lessons?
Oh, here, let me help you.
No, the sheets. Do you have any sheet,
Oh,
study guide?
yes, I do.
And I can bring this back.
Yeah. Here, go just hand this one. We'll keep going around.
No, we lost it.
Oh, you lost it. You just want to hand those around. Oh, what did you I'll take them over here, Sarah. Thank you. Nick, I know it was you.
It probably was.
Yeah, I know where it was. I know what happened. Oh, that's good. Well, let's open with prayer, and then we'll go into Genesis 30. Heavenly Father, thank you for this day, and Lord, thank you that you continue to work in our lives in the midst of all that we've got going on, and in the midst of our own dysfunction and the dysfunction around us. You continue to be merciful and show us your grace. And so, Lord, help us to see that today and every day that comes. In Jesus' name, amen. Amen. All right, so just a quick reminder, there will not be class next week. I will be on vacation. So if you come, you will be a class of one, okay? Feel free to do so if you'd like, but no, it's... Yeah, we'll resume the following week then like normal. But just next week, no class. So online, there'll be nothing online either. Okay? Cool. And I tell you where I'm going on vacation, but trying to really keep it a secret for Katie and the boys. Yeah, it's like, so Katie's got a big birthday coming up on the 9th. I won't say which one it is, but it's a big one. Thank you, Ross. I'd hate to look foolish for too long. Thank you for that. And so want to keep it a surprise. The funny story I have going with my mom is that my dad got me this boom box for my garage, because you got to have a radio in your garage, right? And I had one, but it was kind of broken. And so he got me this one, and he wanted to give it to me as a surprise. And my mom said, hey, your dad's got something for you. It's a surprise. I said, oh, what is it? She goes, well, I don't want to tell you. I said, okay, well, that's fine. You don't have to tell me. I'll wait. And then literally like 5 seconds later, she said, it's a boombox for the garage. And so, my mom's like, so legit. Right after that, she goes, so where are you going on vacation? I'm not telling you. Like, you'll tell the kids. Like, She goes, well, you could tell your dad. I said, I don't want to put him in a compromised position there. Like, if he knows, who knows what you'll do to try to get that information out of him. So, yeah, it's fun. But we're looking forward to it. It should be a lot of fun. Yeah. So chapter 30. If you remember just a little bit before, Leah was hated, still is hated in chapter 30. But she's the one who's having kids. And we talked about last week just that powerful piece about Judah being the last child, right? And that one being the one where she praises the Lord in it. Obviously, Jesus coming from the line of Judah. So many powerful connections into that piece, right? The child coming through the one that was hated by the world, right? Just so many great, powerful motifs in there. Some great connections there. So now we get into chapter 30, and we see like essentially a Cold War starting. Like it's legit back and forth between them. So chapter 30, when Rachel saw that she bore Jacob no children, she envied her sister. She said to Jacob, give me children or I shall die. Jacob's anger was kindled against Rachel, and he said, am I in the place of God who has withheld from you the fruit of the womb? Then, by the way, it's a bold strategy to blame your wife for why the womb is closed. I wouldn't recommend that, okay? I wouldn't. Then she said, here is my servant Bilhah. Go into her so that she may give birth on my behalf, that even I may have children through her. So she gave him her servant Bilhah as a wife. And Jacob went into her, and Bilhah conceived and bore Jacob a son. Then Rachel said, God has judged me and has also heard my voice and given me a son. Therefore she called his name Dan. Rachel's servant Bilhah conceived again and bore Jacob a second son. Then Rachel said, with mighty wrestlings I have wrestled with my sister and have prevailed. So she called his name Naphtali. Okay, we'll stop there for a second. So, like I said, this Cold War starts. Rachel's not able to have kids, so she brings in her own weapon of mass destruction, right? She brings in Bilhah and says, listen, you're going to have kids through this one. And kind of has some similarities to Hagar, per se. Not going to end up the same way, but very much that Sarai-Hagar conversation kind of happening on there a little bit. But then we see just at the start of verse 1, Rachel's comment, give me children or I shall die. Those words come true for her, specifically at the very end as she gives birth to Joseph. She actually dies in childbirth. And so very much kind of a self-fulfilling prophecy, if you will, there. She will die on account of having children. Okay? Also speaks to why Joseph was the favorite, because that was Rachel's son, and she died in childbirth in that situation. Okay? So then we get this little fight, and I don't know about you, but when I look at this, I just picture like a couple's fight, right? Like Rachel is angry at Jacob and about the situation. Jacob raises his voice back at her, blames her for this. It's kind of the dysfunction that they both deserve, if you will. Just with how they've treated Leah, how they've gone about this whole situation, but you can tell there's a lot of frustration, there's a lot of fighting that's happening, and it's creating this tension between them. Okay. So then Rachel develops a plan, again, very similar to Sarah, to Sarai and her plan, right? I've got this maid servant here, in this case, Bilhah. And one thing, and I can't remember if we talked about this at all, but with Bilhah, we've got these maid servants who will come back in. You got to remember, these are the wedding presents of Laban to his daughters, right? And so it's customary that when a daughter got married, you gave her a gift of some kind. In this case, these were the maid servants, right? So here's the person who's going to take care of you. This maid servant is going to be the one who helps you hygienically, all of those things, right? That's their job, right? And what's fascinating about this in particular, and speaks to the role or even the view of these maidservants, right? Bilhah doesn't get a voice in this. She doesn't get a say. It's just what she's supposed to do, not once but twice, right? So it's not a great situation, nor is it a really favored job to have. Okay. So yeah, Rachel's got this big plan she's cooked up. And then she has these triumphal words. With mighty wrestlings, I have wrestled with my sister and have prevailed. Anyone know the score at this point in terms of what this is? So there's 2 kids, not even by Rachel, right? By Bilhah. So there's 2 there. And Leah's got 4, I think is where we're at. Okay. To me, it's just kind of comical. It's kind of like when you watch, football on Sunday and a team's down 28-0 and they score a touchdown and they celebrate all over the place. You're going, you're still down by 21 points, right? Like, I'm not sure what you're celebrating here, but obviously for her it was a big deal that she could have children through her maidservant, right? I don't know that there was any prevailing happening, but also it's interesting that there's no recognition of God's blessing in this. Very much just kind of a self-centered thing. It's about me and my tally, my score, if you will. Okay. Any questions about Rachel and her prevailing?
She does say she was vindicated.
Yeah?
There was that little point of hope in her.
Yeah. Yeah, God has judged me and has also heard my voice and given me a son. Yeah. Yeah, there is a little bit there. You're right, Nate. Just a little bit. But a lot of it just seems to be more me. You know, and Leah starts to take part in that too. Right? We see that here in just a minute. But no, you're right. It's a good catch, Nate. It's a good catch. Any other thoughts? All right, so then we go on. Cold War ramps up. When Leah saw that she had ceased bearing children, she took her servant Zilpah and gave her to Jacob as a wife. Then Leah's servant Zilpah bore Jacob a son. And Leah said, "Good fortune has come." So she called his name Gad. Leah's servant Zilpah bore Jacob a second son. And Leah said, "Happy am I, for women have called me happy." So she called his name Asher. Okay? So in other words, yeah, like I said, there two can play at that game. You want to pull in the big guns, I'll pull in the big guns too. Okay? We'll get Zilpah involved here and start having kids left and right. And again, all of this just comes from affection and a desire for favor, if you will, right? It's just not what God had in mind. You go back to Genesis 2, you talk about the relationship of husband and wife, of people together. It wasn't meant to be a competition, right? It wasn't meant to be some kind of just test or what do you want to call it? A show of might or skill or whatever you want to say. But it's turned into just awful dysfunction. And yet, as each child is born, so a tribe of Israel comes forward, right? Even in the Cold War, there's some good things that come from it.
And that's God's purpose. I mean, it's
God works
recorded-
through it.
It's recorded in the Bible. It's His words. I mean,
Yep.
well, by the inspired word of God. But you know, why put it in there? This all this dysfunction. Does it show us that we're sinful and or what? You know.
Oh, I think it
what's the
speaks.
purpose?
I think it just speaks to God's mercy, His power, His might, in the midst of all these things, that He still accomplishes what He needs to accomplish or wants to accomplish. So it very much is that thought, Ross, that my goodness, there's a lot going on here, and there's a lot of dysfunction to unpack. But even in the midst of it, God still gets done what needs to get done, and that's a comfort in some ways. I think it should be a comfort for us to recognize that He still accomplishes so much even in the midst of our own dysfunction. But it is just it's a testament to God working in a sin-filled and broken world, that even that doesn't stop Him. Yeah. As much as we think it might. Because there are times I can't even imagine, and I'm not trying to read into the lines here of Scripture, but I'm sure there's a lot of pain in trying to figure out why they stopped having kids, right? A lot of going to God saying, "Why aren't you doing something, right? Why is this happening?" All of those things, but very much God continues to work. Any other thoughts or questions? All right, so then it continues on. In the days of the wheat harvest, Reuben went and found mandrakes in the field and brought them to his mother Leah. Then Rachel said to Leah, "Please give me some of your son's mandrakes." But she said to her, "Is it a small matter that you have taken away my husband? Would you take away my son's mandrakes also?" Boy, if that's not a touchy issue, I don't know what is, right? Like, I just want some mandrakes. Well, you took my husband. Whoa, right? Like, doesn't seem to be equivalent there, but all right, right? Rachel said, then he may lie with you tonight in exchange for your son's mandrakes. When Jacob came from the field in the evening, Leah went out to meet him and said, "Guess what? You must come in to me, for I have hired you." That's always what you want the marriage relationship to sound like, right? "With my son's mandrakes." So he lay with her that night, and God listened to Leah, and she conceived and bore Jacob a fifth son. Leah said, "God has given me my wages because I gave my servant to my husband." So she called his name Issachar. Okay?
You
Yeah.
know what mandrakes
Oh, yeah, yep. Yeah,
are.
so,
Ginseng.
what's that?
Ginseng.
Yep. It's also
It's an
often,
aphrodisiac.
yeah, that's the belief behind it, is that it's an aphrodisiac. Yep. Yep. That's the thought process behind that. So when Rachel is asking for mandrakes, she's essentially asking for help, right? In order to have more kids, right? That's the concept, or at least that's the thought process. So that's how we understand Leah's response to be as strong as it is. It seems like they're just talking about a vegetable or something like that, but it's actually Rachel wanting to have more kids, the belief that the mandrakes would accomplish that, and Leah going, well, I'm not going to give. It would be the equivalent of the United States giving Russia uranium and saying, but don't make nukes with it, right? Like, it's kind of that same concept. It's just not how it works. And so Leah said, fine, you can have the mandrakes, that aphrodisiac, but I get to sleep with him tonight. And that's kind of where it ends up. Which, again, is exactly the way God intended marriage to be, right? That you
Yeah.
have to hire your husband to sleep with you for the night. Yep. Yeah.
We used to live in Wausau, Big Midford, and that's the prime area for ginseng in the United States.
Yeah.
And there are fields and fields and fields covered, they can't be out in the sun, so they're all covered with black material.
Sure.
And it takes 4 years to develop a crop big enough to harvest,
Yeah.
and it all goes to China.
Hmm.
All goes to China.
Wow. Well, yeah, ginseng is huge over in the east. Yeah. Yeah, no, it's a unique thing. I was going to ask what the birth rates were in that area, but I everything okay?
Yeah, the Wi-Fi cut out of my office, so I was just seeing if it was.
Oh, something on our
Down
end?
here, but still working down here. so-
Yes, you're still working. Yay. Yeah, I mean, essentially, this is what it is, right? It's basically Leah and Rachel trying to see who still can have the most kids, right? And Rachel's looking for a little help with that. Leah doesn't want to help unless she gets something in return. Yeah. Yeah. Any questions on that at all?
It's a precursor to Viagra.
Pretty much. I mean, that's kind of the gist. It's kind of the gist.
Our
Yeah.
Bible calls it love fruits.
Love fruits.
Love fruits,
Is that the slogan in the town where they grow it? Like, love fruit, or, you know, is that the slogan of the town?
I
That,
didn't hear the slogan.
oh, love fruit.
Oh,
No.
no. Harvey's call was to the community of Hamburg, and that was the center of where ginseng was. In fact, the people that started growing it were members of our congregation.
Hmm.
And their ancestors had started growing it commercially. So it was just a crop, it was a cash crop for them, it was a way
Yeah.
for them to get money. And nobody there used it.
Right.
I mean, it was all sent to China, that was just.
Huh.
That was a sad story about that. A couple that lived in, I can't think of the town, just south of Wausau, and they wanted to put a coast-to-coast store in there, and they were gonna buy that coast-to-coast store and set it up with the proceeds from their ginseng crop.
Oh, sure.
And I was the district manager, I got them all set up, and they got in the store, and while they were setting up the store, the crop came in, they harvested the crop, they got a check for $1 million. They went out to celebrate and choked on a piece of steak and got there.
Oh.
Gee.
Just like that.
Hmm.
Just so sad.
Yeah. Wow. Wow. Crazy. Crazy. Man. So then it continues on from there. Any last questions about mandrakes or essentially prostituting your husband out? Any?
pretty sexy.
Yeah, I mean, it's not a G-rated book, I'm telling you that right now. This is the stuff they don't teach in Sunday school, and I don't get it.
Wow.
So then it continues, it says, and Leah conceived again, and she bore Jacob a sixth son. Then Leah said, God has endowed me with a good endowment. Now my husband will honor me, because I have borne him 6 sons. So she called his name Zebulun. Afterwards she bore a daughter and called her name Dinah. Okay. So we see there again still that desire, right, for affection from her husband, to have notoriety, to have something that she can at least hang on to, showing that she's loved. It's hard to be Leah. It's hard to be Leah. Oh, yeah, tell me more about that. I've heard of it.
He's married all these years and he's got all these kids back. I mean, that's
Yeah, it could be, yeah. No, is that Latter-day Saints, or what's that, Mormon? Yeah. Yeah. No, it's one of the reasons why, like, polygamy is just not something that God wants, is because it's supposed to be an image of God and his church, his people, right? And the only way that image remains true and pure, if you will, if it's a one-to-one. When you start having multiple partners involved with that, then the issue of favoritism comes along, right? And that's just not how God works in his church. There is no favoritism. It's not like, well, I like Sue better than Steve, so therefore Sue's going to get a double blessing versus Steve, right? It's just not a picture. It's not an accurate picture. It's more like a 2-year-old coloring picture at that point with the scribbles all over it, right? So no, that's the concept, and that's why polygamy is just not a thing for us. It just is not an accurate picture of Christ and his church and the life it's supposed to look like. Yeah, Ross.
I'm guessing the whole reason for polygamy was to inhabit the earth. I mean, you need to, from a couple, Adam and Eve.
For sure.
I mean, what else are you gonna do? I mean, you gotta do that. But when was it you think that polygamy became?
Well, there's
something
moments
that
in
you could-
Scripture where God says, no more. Time
Oh,
out.
really?
We're done. Yeah.
Where's that? Approximately. Well,
I can't remember where it is, but I think it's in the laying out of the Levitical laws and things of that
okay.
nature, which just shows how well it's followed when Solomon has his many wives after the fact, and David has his many wives. Well, concubines at that point, not wives, because that's the fine print version, right? Yeah, the loophole, if you will.
must have been some great marriages in his life, huh?
Yeah. You don't look to the Old Testament for marriage advice. You just don't. Outside of Genesis 2, don't go anywhere else for it.
Yeah.
Like, it's just not. It's not good. But even that, right? I mean, you talk about, it's probably a logistical thing to have that in the beginning, right? Because you have so few and so many, right? But it still comes back to that Genesis 2 and the way it was supposed to be. It was supposed to be 1-to-1. That was the idea. That was the dream, right? That was the created intent. And brokenness did a number on it in so many ways. So many ways. It's not a coincidence that that's the thing that's always constantly under attack, scrutiny, questioning, right? Are we meant to be monogamous? We seem to be more meant to be polygamous. I don't know that that's true, right? Like, it always just seems to be the thing that is constantly under attack. And I think that that's a intentional thing from Satan himself, to constantly go to that one thing that gives us a little glimpse as to what it's supposed to be. Yeah. So it's hard. Yeah, and there's not great examples, like I said, in the Old Testament. I don't know that you necessarily want to go back and find some good how-tos in here. Yeah. All right, so then they're on the road again. Verse 25. As soon as Rachel had borne Joseph, Jacob said to Laban, send me away. I'm sorry, it wasn't Joseph that where she died. It was Benjamin. My apologies. It wasn't Joseph, it was Benjamin. That was the last child that Rachel had. That was the one she died in childbirth with. My apologies. Benjamin. So Jacob said to Laban, send me away that I may go to my own home and country. Give me my wives and my children for whom I have served you, that I may go, for you know the service that I have given you. But Laban said to him, if I have found favor in your sight, I have learned by divination that the Lord has blessed me because of you. Name your wages, and I will give it. Jacob said to him, you yourself know how I have served you, and how your livestock have fared with me. For you had little before I came, and it has increased abundantly, and the Lord has blessed you wherever I turned. But now when shall I provide for my own household also? He said, what shall I give you? Jacob said, you shall not give me anything if you will do this for me. I will again pasture your flock and keep it. Let me pass through all your flock today, removing from it every speckled and spotted sheep, and every black lamb, and the spotted and speckled among the goats, and they shall be my wages. So my honesty will answer for me later when you come to look into my wages with you. Everyone that is not speckled and spotted among the goats and black among the lambs, if found with me, shall be counted stolen. Laban said, good. Let it be as you have said. We'll finish up there. But then that day Laban removed all the male goats that were striped and spotted, and all the female goats that were speckled and spotted, every one that had white on it, and every lamb that was black, and put them in the charge of his sons. And he set a distance of 3 days' journey between himself and Jacob pastured the rest of Laban's flock. So there you go, right? Never con a con man, right? That's kind of the gist. So we see here it's time to go. Jacob's got his sons, he's got his wives, he's got his family. He's got to leave the nest, right? It's time to launch, time to do his own thing. And we see that Laban is hesitant to do that. We see in verses 27 and 28 that he learned by divination that Laban was blessed because of Jacob's presence there. That's a big no-no, going to divination to figure that out. It's the same kind of concept as a Ouija board and talking through a Ouija board. If you want a biblical example, go ahead and look at Saul consulting the witch at Endor, and the ghost of Samuel rising and basically sealing Saul's fate, if you will, that he was to die. It's a big no-no. It's not a good thing. Laban is pretty desperate here in this instance, and kind of gives that impression of a guy who can't handle finances well. A little bit of some sloppiness to him in terms of just life in general. So yeah, he's learned that essentially he's blessed because of Jacob, and that would be true, right? Jacob received the blessing from Isaac. Very much part of it that he would be blessed in everything he did. That was part of Jacob's blessing from Isaac, is that no matter where he went, what he did, God would bless him, and that's what we see here. And so Laban doesn't want that to leave. He doesn't want that to end because he knows what that means if it does end. And so that's what I mean by Laban's mistake, is the concept of divination. Just stay away from that stuff. Just stay away from it. No good can come from it. Okay? And actually what we see throughout this as we go into verses 29 and 30 is Jacob treats Laban fairly in this. He's not looking for an angle. He's not looking for, a maneuvering through this in Jacob's sinister ways like he was previous. He's actually trying to be honorable in this. Share with Laban that he needs to leave. It's time to go. Here's the deal. This is what I think. This is the best way to maybe divide up what's there. So very much, he's trying to handle this in a very respectable way, and actually has the authority to do so. That's what I mean there by the shoes on the other foot. Basically, Jacob says, listen, I'm in a position of power now. I came to you penniless, right? We talked about that. His dowry wasn't camels and gold and all that stuff. It was his hard work, what turned out to be for 14 years, right? But now he's got a ton of stuff, and it's time to go. And then we see that they reach the deal. Basically, all the undesirable sheep, goats, those would belong to Jacob. The ones that were desirable, the ones that were white, pure, those kinds of concepts, Laban would keep those. Okay? So in other words, Jacob is actually offering up the worst part of the deal, if you will. Basically saying, I'll take the ones that nobody really wants. Those will be mine. And you can keep the ones that are really good, that everybody's going to want. Because it's not just the appearance, it's also the breeding, right? So if the lamb or the goat was pure white, odds are that as it mated with other farmers or other flocks or things of that nature, you would end up with that pure white. So it would just continue on down the line. Okay, so it's not just, well, they're fat, they're full of meat, or they're just good for the sacrifice. There's also some mating things in there where other flocks would want to engage, almost like a racehorse, right? If it wins the Triple Crown, there's a stud fee that goes through the roof because the odds are they'll produce another horse that could win the Triple Crown, right? So people will pay out the nose for that. In the same way here, there's that concept where, boy, if they're getting good stuff from their flock, then my flock needs to be a part of that too. I want the breeding rights with that. They had a good grasp on genetics. This is always the thing that baffles me. I actually saw a headline on this today, that, what was it? They discovered some enormous building that was built really long time ago, ancient times. And the article was something to the effect of, well, it's causing us to rethink what they really knew back in those times. As if they were not as intelligent, or as if they were dumber in some respects. And it's like, that's the mistake, guys. Just because we do things differently now, or we have different ways of thinking about it, such as hydraulics or whatever it might be, it doesn't mean that they were dumber. It's probably actually smarter because they had to do the math and they had to figure that all out in their heads and work through all of those things. So when we talk about genetics, they didn't have like the microscope to look at the DNA sequencing or things of that nature, but they knew if you put a white lamb with a white lamb, you were going to end up with a white lamb, right? Like that was what they knew. They were intelligent to know that stuff. Yeah, it always gets me when there's kind of that concept of, well, they just didn't know, or as if they were less intelligent. I just don't know that that's the case.
Look at the pyramid.
Yeah, right. They still don't know necessarily how they did that. Yeah.
It was incredible. And
Yep.
then it was all physical hand labor.
Yep.
They didn't have big machines.
It was aliens. That's what I heard. Yeah. It was aliens. That's all there is to it. Sorry. No, but it's one of those things people always wonder, how do they do that? Part of that is when you have an indispensable amount of labor, you can do whatever you want to do, right? Like when you've got that many people living, and you think about just Israel, you're not talking about tens of thousands of people leaving Egypt when they left. You're talking about potentially hundreds of thousands, even a million people, right? It's a gigantic group of people. And when you have that at your disposal to do whatever you want with it, yeah, you could build whatever you want. It might kill a whole bunch of them, but they're slaves, right? In their perspective, so what does it matter? You get your pyramid, it's all good. It's incredible how they were able to do some of those things. Yeah. So then the deal's reached, like I said, and then we get to Laban's deceit. So basically what he's doing here is he's taking out all the ones that might produce the sheep and the goats that Jacob could keep. So like we talked about with the genetics, right? He's leaving behind the ones that will be white on white, right? So the odds of them ever being speckled or striped or anything like that, slim to none, right? Slim to none. So in other words, if Jacob is really wanting to leave, and his leaving is based on getting striped and speckled sheep, goats, all those things, he's never going to leave. because there's never going to be striped and speckled sheep or goats. They'll always just be the white, pure sheep and goats. So in other words, this is Laban's way of making sure Jacob never leaves, because he could never afford to leave. That's the gist. Okay? Now you got to think at some point Jacob goes, there's a lot less sheep here than there used to be. You know, like, huh? But yeah, it's just it's how he tried to figure it out. Laban at least did. So does that make sense? So that's the thought process behind Laban's practice here. Essentially, I'll take out all the ones that could potentially end up being Jacob's, as they continue to have sheep and have their own children, right? Their own, whatever the kid version is. Well, I guess kid for goats, so there you go. The little version for sheep and goats, and all it'll be is just my flocks that are going to get produced, and I'll get to keep them all. On top of that, Jacob not only never leaves, but then all those sheep and goats that are born, there'll be a number of them because he's blessed and will continue to produce mass numbers of them. So, yeah, it's not dumb, right? It's not the craziest thing we've heard so far in Genesis in terms of some of the deceit here. It's actually pretty shrewd. Still wrong, but pretty shrewd. So then we get to the last of it here. Then Jacob took fresh sticks of poplar and almond and plane trees and peeled white streaks in them, exposing the white of the sticks. He set the sticks that he had peeled in front of the flocks in the troughs, that is, the watering places, where the flocks came to drink. And since they bred when they came to drink, the flocks bred in front of the sticks. And so the flocks brought forth striped, speckled, and spotted. This is like Sally sells seashores or whatever by the seashore. And Jacob spotted the lambs and set the faces of the flocks toward the striped and all the black in the flock of Laban. He put his own droves apart and did not put them with Laban's flock. Whenever the stronger of the flock were breeding, Jacob would lay the sticks in the troughs before the eyes of the flock, that they might breed among the sticks. But for the feebler of the flock, he would not lay them there. So the feebler would be Laban's, and the stronger Jacob's. Thus the man increased greatly and hired large flocks, female servants and male servants, and camels and donkeys. Never con a con man, right?
Deception.
Yeah, that's, well, and this is the thing, right? So the piece about, we got to break this up into two sections, right? So there's the piece where Jacob puts these sticks out there, and it's producing these striped and speckled sheep, goats, all those things. That's a God thing. We're going to find that out here in chapter 31, where Jacob gets that idea, because it kind of comes out of the blue, right? It's just kind of like, okay, like where did that idea come from? Is that like an actual practice? It's not. It almost seems a little bit like luck in the sense of you're playing the odds, if you will, a little bit, but it's actually something God came to him in a dream and said, do this with the sticks, right, and do it that way and go forward in that way, right? But the one part that God didn't point out in the dream is the whole stronger, weaker thing. That's a Jacob part into this. So basically, Jacob said, yes, God, I'll do that, but I'm going to do that with those that are stronger and not with Laban's who are weaker, because now Laban will only have weak flocks and I'll have strong flocks, right? Yeah. So that's where the deception comes in, is that piece of the stronger, weaker. The whole stick thing was very much part of God showing up in a dream, telling Jacob to do that. But again, never told Jacob, make sure to separate between the stronger and the weaker ones, because you'll want the stronger. So Laban thinks he's getting a good deal because they're white, they're pure, they're clean, all those things. But he's actually getting a really raw deal because nobody's going to want weak sheep or weak flocks. Okay? Yeah, never con a con man. That's the lesson learned.
Would a white sheep be albino, like a white rabbit?
I don't think so. It's more just the desired trait that they don't have a blemish. It would be seen as a blemish to have anything other than the white. And as we saw later in the ceremonial laws, religious laws, all those things. That was the desire, right? Not to have a sheep without blemish that you sacrifice, right? So obviously there's value in it in the system back in the day to have that unblemished sheep, goat, whatever it may be, livestock. Yeah. Yep. So any questions about that at all? Okay. So I think I made enough copies. Hopefully I did. Here we go into chapter 31. Get the power button going. There it is. Making our way around there. Chapter 31. Everybody was able to check in here on attendance. Submit. Cool beans. All right, so chapter 31 as we continue on there. So Jacob's plan is in work. As Jacob continues to be successful in having that flock, that herd, Laban's people catch wind of it. Doesn't go well for him, so he's really got to go. It's really, really time to go. Do we have enough to get down there? We're going to be close. We're close. Cool. Thank you, guys. Appreciate that. Man, too short. Too short. Okay. So Jacob flees Laban. It says there, now Jacob heard that the sons of Laban were saying, Jacob has taken all that was our father's, and from what was our father's, he has gained all his wealth. And Jacob saw that Laban did not regard him with favor as before. Then the Lord said to Jacob, return to the land of your fathers and to your kindred, and I will be with you. So Jacob sent and called Rachel and Leah into the field where his flock was, and said to them, I see that your father does not regard me with favor as he did before, but the God of my father has been with me. You know that I have served your father with all my strength, yet your father has cheated me and changed my wages 10 times. But God did not permit him to harm me. If he said the spotted shall be your wages, then all the flock bore spotted. And if he said the striped shall be your wages, then all the flock bore striped. Thus God has taken away the livestock of your father and given them to me. In the breeding season of the flock, I lifted up my eyes and saw in a dream that the goats that mated with the flock were striped, spotted, and molted. Mottled? That's the word, sorry. Mottled. That's a fun word. Then the angel of God said to me in the dream, Jacob, and I said, here I am. And he said, lift up your eyes and see all the goats that mate with the flock are striped, spotted, and mottled. For I have seen all that Laban is doing to you. I am the God of Bethel, where you anointed a pillar and made a vow to me. Now arise, go, and out from this land, and return to the land of your kindred. Then Leah and Rachel answered and said to him, is there any portion or inheritance left to us at our father's house? Excuse me. Are we not regarded by him as foreigners? For he has sold us, and he has indeed devoured our money. All the wealth that God has taken away from our father belongs to us and to our children. Now then, whatever God has said to you, do. Okay? So, we got Jacob getting ready to leave. And part of the reason for that leaving is he's surveying the landscape and seeing that he's a persona non grata anymore, right? Like, not welcome. Just not welcome there anymore. You got Jacob's Laban's sons who are getting furious because it looks like Jacob is taking all of Laban's flocks. And it's not fair situation. It is their inheritance, right? So you understand where they're coming from a little bit, why they might be displeased with Jacob getting all the flocks, because that's supposed to be theirs when Laban kicks the can, right? That's the concept. And basically they're seeing their inheritance dwindle away. So they're not happy. Laban's not happy with Jacob. He's fallen out of favor. Leah and Rachel no longer in the spotlight with Laban. He's not a big fan of them anymore. It's time to go. Right? That's one piece of it. But the other piece of it is God tells him to. We see that later on, in this text, when God spoke to him in the dream. Verse 13. I am the God of Bethel, where you anointed the pillar, made a vow to me. Now arise, go out from this land, and return to the land of your kindred. Right? God tells him it's time to go. And that's one of the big reasons why he decides it's time to go. When God tells you to move, it's time to move, right? And one thing I wanted to point out in that as we get to the second question there, it's basically it's time to go home. That's where Jacob's going, right? That's the place where he's going to eventually end up. What's fascinating about that is that should tell you how bad the relationship with Laban has gotten, to the point where he's willing to go back home, and as far as he knows, has a brother who's going to kill him once he arrives, right? So it should tell you how bad this whole Laban thing has gotten, that he's willing to go home to a brother who is waiting to kill him, okay? It's not good. It's not good. It's not just minor disagreements at this point, okay? But also, it wasn't Rebekah who called him home, as she had said she would. It was God. We talked about that, how sad that is. That essentially when Jacob was sent away, Rebekah's promise is that she would be the one to tell, Jacob, come home. Right? She would send somebody. But it was God who was the one who ended up calling Jacob home. So then Jacob calls this family conference. Cold War is put on ice for a little bit there as Leah and Rachel come together. Sorry about that. They come together, and they're even under the same impression, right? We're all united. Which, again, is a pretty powerful statement to how bad it's gotten, that Leah and Rachel can agree on one thing together, right? That it's time to go. That they're willing to put aside their hostilities for a moment and come together so that they could leave this place. Any questions at all on that? So they're getting ready to leave. They need to leave. It's time to leave. And there are just those moments in life where it's time to go. Right? I think this speaks to some of those circumstances where people wonder, do I stay? Right? Do I stay in the dysfunctional situation? Do I stay here? Whatever it might be. There are times in life where it's just time to go. And that's okay. It's not to say you'll run at the first sign of trouble, but it is to say that it's not always God's thing for you to stay in those situations, in those relationships. So as we look at that, any questions about that before? So as we talk about, a couple of chapters ago, we talked about essentially like this is Jacob's exile, right? This is him being sent out when he's sent away from his family. He's being sent out. Chad Bird also would talk about it in terms of his exodus, right? And what's fascinating about this is how Jacob's exodus mirrors the exodus of Israel, especially when it comes to Egypt. So it always starts with God's people in exile. In this case, Jacob's exile, right? He's sent away, not supposed to be there anymore. They are oppressed. Jacob was oppressed. He lays that out. His wages changed 10 times. He's being treated unfairly. God even recognizes that in the dream, says, hey, this guy's not treating you well, right? It's not a good situation. Then God enriches them through their oppressors, right? Remember, Jacob is taking care of Laban's flock here. It's not his own. It's Laban's. But the ones that they agreed to become Jacob's. So in other words, it's through Laban's flock that Jacob gets wealthy, right? And then they finally leave with more than they entered into with. When Jacob arrived, he had nothing. When he leaves, he's got everything. And the same with Israel, right? They were in Exodus, they were sent away, right? They were oppressed in Egypt. They were beaten, mistreated, even killed. God enriches them through their oppressors, right? In other words, for Israel, they became wealthy off of Egypt, and as they leave, they take all that wealth with them. Okay? So there's this mirroring that happens between Jacob's story here with Laban and kind of a little bit before, and Israel and what it would look like leaving Egypt, being in Egypt. Okay? Any questions about that at all? So then this is where verses 10 through 13, this is where we get the context behind the sticks, right, and the breeding. And again, noting what God told him to do versus what Jacob did. God very much followed the whole stick thing, right? But in terms of the stronger and weaker, that was not part of the arrangement. Okay? Jacob added his own flair to it, if you will. Okay? So then we see when Rachel and Leah are talking in verse 14, is there any portion or inheritance left to us in our father's house? Are we not regarded by him as foreigners? For he has sold us, and he has indeed devoured our money. All the wealth that God has taken away from our father belongs to us and to our children. Now then, whatever God has said to you, do. So there's supposed to be an inheritance for the daughters, right? Just as the sons, right? We talked about that a little bit, how the sons were having a problem with Jacob because they're watching the inheritance dwindle away as the flock gets smaller and smaller. Jacob's gets larger and larger. But for the daughters, there's supposed to be an inheritance too, and Jacob has basically gone and, or not Jacob, but Laban has gone and spoiled it. It's all gone. It's not there anymore. And there's this picture that starts to get painted with Laban as to who he is. He's got some financial issues, right? He's concerned about Jacob leaving because he's been blessed by him, right? Doesn't want him to go because he knows what it means. It means that he'll get smaller and smaller. But we see that basically if he's got possessions, he's going to spend it. He's going to use it, whatever it is. So he's not exactly the most thrifty individual in the world. Very much is probably more of a spender than a saver. Okay?
But Jacob, Laban's sons must not have been worth much either,
Correct.
because he wasn't relying on them, he was relying on Jacob.
Correct.
Yeah.
Yep. Yeah, you're getting a good picture here of the family in general, right? Like, there's not a lot there outside of Jacob. And most likely because what's there is just so dysfunctional, right? And not healthy. You would think, because again, Jacob has been working for Laban. And so everything that Jacob has done, you know, the massive amount of flocks, all this stuff, were Laban's up until that agreement they reached. So he was prospering mightily, right? This is a massive amount, and yet somehow still doesn't have anything left, right? Like, it's not because God took away everything, it's because he kind of dwindled it away. He just kind of, I don't know if spent is the right word, right? But essentially, he had a lot because Jacob was blessing, right? And there was a lot going his way, and now all of a sudden he's got really nothing. Yeah, that kind of speaks to some things going on there. Yeah. And even the fact that his sons couldn't maintain that or keep that or whatever it was. Yeah. Yeah. So then we get just into him going back home, and we talked about this a little bit. So Jacob arose and set his sons and his wives on camels. He drove away all his livestock, all the property he had gained, the livestock in his possession that he had acquired in Paddan Aram, to go to the land of Canaan to his father Isaac. Okay? So it just tells you how bad it's gotten that he's going home. His brother, as far as he knows, is still waiting to kill him. Still better than staying with Laban. Still better than staying with him. And then we get this next verse, and we'll stop after this verse because there's enough there. Laban had gone to shear his sheep, and Rachel stole her father's household gods. Okay? So this is that's verse 19. Yeah, Laban had gone to shear his sheep, and Rachel stole her father's household gods. It's a loaded verse, okay? And it really, looking at commentaries, there's a few different ways to look at this, right? So one way is, whoever was in possession of the household gods was in possession of the inheritance, okay? So version 1, if you will, is Rachel knew that her inheritance was very little, if anything, so she took the household gods so that when Laban kicked the can, she would get whatever was left. Okay? That's one version. Okay? The second version is the household gods were typically made of like fine gold, jewelry, all of those things. So Rachel doesn't have an inheritance, but she does have this precious gold and jewelry, which might serve as her inheritance in her eyes. Okay? That's the second way to look at it. In both of those instances, she's getting an inheritance one way or the other. Okay? The third option there, and I think this is a best construction option, frankly, was that she wanted to help her dad basically remove the false gods out of his household. And so she took them away so that he would no longer rely on them, try to consult them rather than the God of Israel. I think that that's wishful thinking. I think that it's a consideration, yeah. I think that there's a lot that comes into question in that later on when Laban catches up to Jacob and he's looking for them, and she hides them underneath her and sits on them, and then claims that she can't stand up because she's got women troubles or woman troubles, right? I don't know that that's really what that is, right? But
More deceit.
more deceit. Yep, more deceit. That's kind of the concept. Yeah, if you didn't have to lie about it, it's probably what it is. So, but one of the things that Chad Bird talks about, I'll just touch on this briefly and then we'll connect about it later after not next week, but the week after, is just the concept of little idols, right? The little idols that we all take with us. You know, for Rachel, it's this concept of God is enough, right? But I've also got to have this. And how prevalent that is in Israel's history, right? We've got God and, right? And whatever my little idol is that day. You talk about the golden calf after Egypt. It wasn't that they denounced the God of Israel, right? But they've got the God of Israel, and now they've got this golden calf. And so there's this constant struggle, even in us today. We've got God, and then whatever else we kind of take with us to be our little household God, if you will. And so it's an interesting perspective, and like I said, we'll stop here, we'll bring it up, not next week, the week after. But just that concept of what do we take with us that kind of is our backup God, if you will, which really shouldn't be there, right? What is our little household God we take with us? So it's a fascinating perspective. We'll talk more about it here in a couple weeks, but in the meantime, leave the household gods alone, okay? Don't stick them in a saddle and sit on them, okay? Any questions before we wrap up? All right, well, let's close in prayer. Heavenly Father, thank you that through it all you continue to bring your grace and mercy and plan of salvation into the Old Testament, but is still into our lives today through Jesus. And Lord, help us see that over these next few weeks, the continuation of your work in our lives, but also just Jesus working, moving, and giving us what we need each and every day, most importantly, his grace and his forgiveness. Thank you for all who will come here today. Thank you for all who are here. Just bless them in the rest of their day, knowing that they have you, and that's all they need. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. Thanks, everyone. Have a great week. We've got a town hall meeting coming up.
He was frustrated.